welcome to Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at culture and philosophy behind martial arts. So here we are to talk about, in our very uninformed opinions, the philosophy of Muay Thai. Our level of experience being, we've done a bit.
Yes.
Well, actually, you know what? I've done less. You two have done way more than me, so you're probably more qualified to talk about this.
I used to be well into it, and yeah, I was really into fucking Thai boxing. Like Thai boxing was my main martial art, I would say, for a while, as like maybe from 15 onwards. So, but I would still caveat this episode heavily with not being an expert in the topic.
Yeah.
Yours definitely used to be the main one, Muay Thai Lee, like back when you were like, in shape.
Yeah, cheers. Nice little dig there. No, so I started Muay Thai when I was like 12, for similar reasons why I still train, because I got fat. But yeah, I competed for years and kind of, I don't know, like it's probably similar to you, Alex, in like really bit the bug of like the history of it and why it was cool and like the stories. Like I used to, I've said it before on here, but I used to remember going into my gym and like above where we used to go in, there was like the old pictures in black and white, and then there was one picture where it had different kind of sections of like techniques, like breaking the elephant's tusk, and it was like always like the catch the kick and snap, and like why it was like in Thai boxing and like the different reasons why. And like I used to love looking at it, and then like the kid I was like, I'm gonna try that. And I remember throwing an elbow like one of my first classes, and they was like, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, it's on the poster.
Breaking someone's fucking tibia.
I think it's really interesting that those pictures are all up there, and that's kind of fallen out of fashion of Muay Thai. Muay Thai, at least here, has turned more like boxing. It's like you're just doing the stuff that's effective, and the names for it are very simple. But I remember hearing before, the names of the techniques aren't just like, it's not just like one, like break the elephant's tusk. Like there are weird ones, like the alligator like lashes its tail or something, which I assume has to be like a sweep when you've got someone with one leg. I don't even know what it is, but there's all these weird names. And it's what we think of as like traditional martial arts still applies to Muay Thai, but just no one knows about it anymore.
But that's one of the things. I will get back to like the philosophy of Muay Thai and the history, but that's one of the things of Muay Thai that's kind of old school that has been taken up by MMA recently. So code words, like everybody hails Mark Henry as this like genius. Of like, oh, he shouts pineapple pizza, and they know that's a leg kick. But it's like that's history of Muay Thai. Like that's always been around. I remember when I first started training, we had numbers. So like I remember doing interclubs, and it'd be like 9, Lee, do number 9, and I was like in fear. But like the code words was always coming through as well, and that was like the way we used to get taught. And I think like the old school Muay Thai stuff, if you speak to anybody who's trained in like a proper old school gym, they'll have a set code that only they know, and you can kind of bash elbows with your mates and be like, oh, I know what number 6 is, and like things like that.
Well, everyone does that. I mean, Marvin loves his secret codes. He'd get us doing specific techniques. I don't know if he'd shout out like numbers, but he'd get us doing those specific techniques and always be able to refer to them. Everyone loves the secret codes. Like I think every coach I've ever trained with tries to get me.
But I think it was proper old school Muay Thai. They used to do it like way back in the day, and like shout break the elephant's tusk. Like that. Imagine that's fucking cool in the corner, right? It's like a scene from Kickboxer, isn't it? Catch the leg. It's like break the elephant's tusk.
Well, okay, so we've kind of gone off track.
Way off track. Yeah, sorry
but,
about
that. But I don't know if we have, because
not
really to talk about what Muay Thai is.
Generally what Muay Thai is. But if we can like kind of maybe just quickly go over the fact that Thai boxing, at least to my understanding, was a martial art that is genuinely a martial art in the sense of it was basically used during war, in the old times, in the ancient Siam kingdom times.
16th
And
century.
there you go. And I think that's actually how it got developed. So it is one of those martial arts that has been around for fucking ever. And I think a lot of course, what the sport looks like now is totally different to what I'm sure it looked like when they were doing it as a hand-to-hand combat sort of thing. But I think the techniques got refined a lot through the fact that it was used as hand-to-hand combat in war. So
see, I'm always interested in how it's like changed over time. I mean, I actually think most martial arts were probably at one point developed like out of like war necessity.
yeah,
I don't think people had enough time to like make up these elaborate things like back in the day.
yeah,
They needed a good reason for it. Even like
yeah.
taekwondo was built as like something as part of the military.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in how Muay Thai changed over time. Obviously, it's quite hard to tell exactly how the techniques have changed like back in the day, but Dan at Southampton at Exile, he would always talk about how the Muay Thai clinch had become sort of simplified, as far as I can tell. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, because in my hour of research that I did for this episode, because I've really committed to it, I couldn't find any good information on this. But as I understand
Yeah.
it, Muay Thai, as the betting came in and that became more of a
Yes.
thing, people needed to be trained more quickly and to fight, and so the clinch became quite simplified and scrappy, and that's when you started to lose all of the break the elephant's tusk phrasing, because people started to like cut it down and strip it away.
They also really scaled it back for Westerners. So it was as the kind of the Europeans started going over, we was kind of going over and kind of being big punchers. You look at kind of Ramon Deckers, even before that, but like kind of big punch, big kickboxers, and like the clinch was the big equalizer. So you get the early days when like Westerners were going out to Thailand, they was not showing all the tricks, because when they needed it in the stadiums, like that was the big equalizer. So you can punch me hard and you've got a bit of weight, but as soon as you're in the clinch, you're fucked. And I still think to this day, Westerners are not as good at clinching.
No, of course not. But at the same time, I think Robbie is right in saying that. I mean, the clinch has dominated Thai boxing. If we're already going, let's say, talking about the development of the sport, it's definitely, and you hear legends like fuck, what's his name? Oh my god, I've forgotten.
Doesn't matter.
But essentially, you hear legends talk about, for example, there's one specific person I'm trying to think of, but it doesn't matter what the name is. But he was saying someone who was like fucking godlike during the golden era, and he was saying that it's that actually Westerners are going to probably preserve the Thai boxing, the real Thai boxing, and that they practice the real Thai boxing. That what the Thais practice now and what is fought at the stadiums is basically what the betting has caused. So the fact that people are clinching a lot more, and that just generally the fact that the betting is making fights now, the course of the fight is almost completely determined by how the betting is taking place. That's changing the art. Before, when you watch, to be fair, if you went to watch the golden era fights, they are in a lot of ways a lot more exciting, in my opinion, than what's happening now at the stadiums. I'm not talking about things like one championship.
To be honest, I don't know if that's very fair about any martial art to say that oh, this isn't the real martial art, because to compare it to, well, I don't want to like completely alienate people who are just listening to this for Muay Thai and not Jiu-Jitsu. But if you take Jiu-Jitsu, they always say that like, oh, sport Jiu-Jitsu isn't the real Jiu-Jitsu because it's not like old school Jiu-Jitsu. But like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is only an evolution from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. It's not. There wasn't any particular big revolution. It was a development. I mean, people might kick off about that and say it's the Gracies, but the whole point is that every martial art always
Develops,
undergoes evolution, right? I don't know if it's very fair to say that the Thais aren't practicing real Thai boxing.
I mean,
I understand that the betting may have influenced
I
the way
think
it
the other thing as
happens.
well is how often they have to fight when that's your living. There's kind of like a weird gentleman's agreement where you're not going to go balls to the wall and injure yourself, because chances are you're going to have to be in there again on Thursday. And like,
yeah.
that's how they make their cash, and that's how they survive and pay for their families and things like that. It's kind of, they're fighting tactically because of their necessity to need to fight.
Yeah, no, agreed. Absolutely. It's just interesting to me that people. So I realize who the person is. It's Samarat.
Okay,
Or
yeah.
Samrat. So big legend in the sport. Also a terrible gambler and lost a shit ton of money. So could take his stuff with a pinch of salt. But also you hear other people say that. For example, Senchai said a similar thing, that the sport of Thai boxing is taking a big hit because of the betting, in the sense of what the sport is and what he thinks it is or it should be. Techniques which are, let's say, more exciting to watch, not being performed as much because of the betting influence. So it's just interesting to hear
So
that perspective. But I agree with what you're saying.
yeah, I mean, it is interesting that gambling might take away from the sport in some ways. Now that is, I'll admit, sort of maybe moving away from what the sport actually might be, because those stuff undergoes evolution. It's normally because of changes in technique, or changes in fashion of technique, like not just the way people do things, but I don't know, if knees became more popular, I'm sure over time specific knee techniques would become more effective and counters to that would happen.
I think it was like the 80s, everybody became a front kicker.
Right, exactly. It's stuff like that, or in MMA now, the fashion is the calf kick.
Yeah.
But that's only become a fashion because people developed good boxing and now have that bladed boxing stance, right? It's that kind of natural progression that the boxing was in relation to something else. Now the calf kick is in relation to that. The gambling does make it kind of weird because that is kind of like an external influence rather than the sport itself just developing.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I mean, you have like what you're talking about as well is like rule sets, right? Rule sets also really influence how a sport changes, and I think what you see in Muay Thai as well is like I think that the rule set is really interesting, and I think that does have a big part. Whether you're talking about philosophy from a more actually philosophical standpoint of what the martial art means for the spirit, the mind, whatever, that kind of more superficial look, in terms of the actual what you're trying to train, what techniques you're trying to train, then obviously the rule sets are going to be determining that much more, right? So the in Thai boxing, the rule sets heavily look for example, body kicks are scoring really highly. So you don't see like a massive amount of
But then you look at like
head kicks.
Gambling.
Yeah, right.
Gambling's the main reason why you take the first 2 rounds off.
Yeah,
Like the rules have changed around the gambling, and I know what you mean around body kicks, but it's not just a body kick. They respect counters and not stepping backwards and not reacting to shots, and it's kind of, that's where the traditional side of it comes in, is perfect technique, block, counter. That's a big score. If you can catch a kick and turn them and kick their back, like that, you've won the round, because you're rewarded for using the perfect techniques and the right kind of techniques to score. I think the rule set is still giving the purists what they need in that sense, is that if you're just kind of Mike Tyson, right? Head down, chin down, bob, swing as hard as you can. In Muay Thai, unless you knock them out, you're probably not going to score that well. Whereas if somebody's on the back foot, moving away, front kicks, kind of body kicks as you're missing, you'll score a lot more. And there's that it's still got that kind of pure.
So this is what I think is like maybe not in the sort of social aspect, but in the purely combat aspect, this is what the philosophy of Muay Thai is really about. It's about what makes it different from. It's about what makes it not kickboxing, right? I think actually the weapons you use, knees, kicks, kicks, elbows, knees, punches, are actually the kind of more superficial aspect. I mean, that's obviously important to what Muay Thai is, but you could take those same weapons, put them in a different setting, call it a different martial art, and it wouldn't have the same philosophy. I think really the core of Muay Thai is around, I'm not sure if it's about toughness or if it's about balance. Because I always hear about, like, it's kind of like I always hear about different ways in which you score highly in Muay Thai. And it's either, like, people always give two sort of similar examples. One will be, if you take a huge elbow to the face and it plasters your nose, like, just smears it, like, across your cheek, but you don't, like, flinch or step back, apparently that won't score in Muay Thai. Now, I'm a little bit dubious about that, but let's assume that that's true.
The step back bit is true. If you react to a shot and go backwards, it is seen as a negative, like a big.
Okay, so that's the tough man side of it, right? And then there's the balance side of it. If I kick and I hit you, or no, let's say I kick and you catch it, that doesn't work unless you sweep me, kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's about
sweeps,
that technique.
Sweeps
about
score really high.
Well, the step back thing is it's the block. It's block it. So the perfect shin block, you shouldn't move backwards. If you properly shin block, you shouldn't fire across the ring. If you sweep a front kick, you shouldn't also go flying into the corner. So you're rewarded for that. I get what you mean around toughness, and I think there is a little bit of that, but I think it's also perfect technique to the point where you don't react because you've done it correctly.
Yeah, well, I don't think those two are opposing. I think they go together very well. I mean, it's partly on the attack. Like, if I flail wildly and I hit you, okay, let's go again. So I flail wildly, I throw a massive kick, it smashes your nose, but I'm stumbling all over the place. I have not displayed any balance and technique, and for that reason, I'll not be looked on favorably in the judge's eyes. You, on the other hand, even though you've had your nose destroyed, you showed, like, complete toughness. Now, not just in balance, because obviously you didn't move, but really that's a display of, rock solid, like, not moving. It's a tough man aspect. I think it's kind of like okay, if we're going to get really wishy-washy, it's like the yin and yang of Muay Thai in this way. It's the sort of soft aspect and the hard aspect coming together. That's how you score. On the other hand, I'm a little bit dubious, actually, that guy flailing all over the place and smashing the guy's nose would lose that fight. But,
I get it.
At the end of the day, if you do damage, you do damage.
Yeah, of course. But I think there's also the aspect of it's interesting in Muay Thai that, for example, if someone who does, like, throws volume. So, for example, in other sports, I mean, I don't know about MMA. Maybe not in MMA, but in other sports, if someone throws many strikes, that's seen as can be seen as a positive, and can be seen as not necessarily landing all of them, but just throwing a lot of volume. It can be seen as something positive. But in Muay Thai, it's really, like, that doesn't really score at all. It's more like, again, it's about the perfect technique. So things landing that will, so you going in and just throwing all out, constantly pushing and throwing, but not really causing any damage or landing significantly, you're not going to that's not going to be seen as anything positive.
So it's about efficiency as well, about everything has to be purposeful, kind of thing.
Yeah, and you see that in Thai boxing, that things are not thrown with volume. That it's things are much more calculated, I think, in the way that, you know, people are throwing techniques. They throw them much more sparingly, but when they do, it's with intent, and definitely trying to land something. You might disagree with
Well,
me, Lee. I
have you
don't
ever
know.
seen? Have you ever watched? No, have you ever watched Bacau in K1?
Yeah.
Like it's hilarious because he's got into it with kind of really strong Muay Thai, and the people he's fighting are kind of aggressive, coming at him, and it makes for a really good style fight because it's interesting, but it clearly shows the difference. And I think kind of putting the rules and the scoring to bed a bit, but there's that respect and kind of homage to good technique, like excellent kind of implementation of the technique, so being efficient with your technique and not just throwing for throwing's sake. And then it's that a little bit of the toughness, a little bit of the executing kind of correctly what traditionally you should do in Muay Thai. I think that's only kind of one part of it, and I think we should kind of touch the other aspects of it. So for me, growing up, I loved in the end doing the Y crew.
Mm.
The first time I did it and didn't understand what it was, I was like, I'm getting in. I was like one of my second fight. I was like, I'm going to get in a ring to have a fight with somebody, and I am shitting my pants. And you want me to do a dance? And I was like 15, 16 at the time. So like, apologies, kind of for putting that out the airways. But that was what my mindset was when I was a kid, and I was like, I'm petrified. I've got all this nervous energy. And then when you learn about, and for me, this is what really helped. I remember we was like learning the gyms, why crew in the ring, and I was like, I'm cool, I'm 16, I know everything. And it was like, no, 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 this is like, you pay respect to your gym, you pay respect to your trainers, the people who've come before you. And it's like your gym's way of showing kind of who they are and who they belong to, and like to say thanks to your coach. I really love that side of it. And I
Mm.
really afterwards got on board with that. I still think I could do the gyms where I grew, where I trained at when I was a kid. And
That's
it's just
cool.
because I really enjoyed the respect side of it.
Mm.
There's one thing I wanted to want to run past you. I saw a Y crew where it was almost like a modern Y crew,
Yeah.
as I
John
understand
Wayne
it, a
Parr
lot of
does
my
one.
well, as I understand it, a lot of people in the Y crews will pretend to use weapons. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's always this drawing the bow and shooting.
Yeah.
I've seen one girl doing it, and she pretends to have like a machine gun or something.
Yeah.
The
Right?
best one I've seen is they cut the throat and roll the body out the ring. That I enjoyed that one.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask about this because when I saw it, a lot of people on there were commenting, "Oh, this is really disrespectful."
Mm.
But all of those people were like people from like England or the US, and at the end of the day, we are practicing something from a completely different culture. And I don't know if most of these people even trained Muay Thai. That's the trouble. You know, they're just
Mm.
commenters or Instagram. I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
Um, is that normal within Thai to pretend to be killing and like using weapons, or is that weird? And is it seen as disrespectful? Do you think? I mean,
I
you guys are
think
more experienced. Like, I'm not expecting you to be experts on Thai culture. I just hoping you have a
no,
better idea
yeah, of
about this than
course.
I do.
No, I mean, I don't think I necessarily do have like a great understanding. But what I've seen myself is like Thai fighters playing around with it themselves. It's not just Westerners who bring a different sort of way of doing it. I've seen Thai fighters do it, you know, in interesting, bit more funny, entertaining ways for the crowd. I think, like for me, John Wayne Parr sticks in my mind because I think he like used a pistol um, when he was doing it, and like the Thais loved it from like because he fought at the stadiums as well, and I'm pretty sure like everyone loved it. So you know, it might from what I understand, it's not disrespectful, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I have no idea kind of if it's disrespectful. I think a lot of the ones I've seen have involved some sort of murder with a weapon. But I think there's an expressionism in it. So I really like Muay Thai for this, and like part of the reason I geeked out on it as a kid was because there is like a rich history to read up on, and it's always been there, and it's something to do, and it's stuck with Muay Thai like through the generations. We still do it, and we still respect that that's part of what we do when we train Muay Thai or when we
But
compete.
and also what I liked about it is, yes, there's history, but there's not much mysticism. It's still like balls to the wall, kind of, okay, here is your fucking elbow, and that's gonna cut someone's face open. Like, it's not, here's a knee to the face, it's gonna break your nose. Like, it's not. That's what I liked about it as well. It's like, they're not trying to sugarcoat it. It's very historical, but it's not, I don't want to name martial arts out there, but you have these historical martial arts which are just wrapped with mysticism and like, incredible techniques which probably don't actually, apply to many.
Have you been looking at them Instagram accounts again where people knock each other over with a sneeze and things like that?
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, right?
Shout out to McDojo Life.
McDojo Life.
What a page.
Fucking amazing.
But that's the thing, though. Like, we may complain about the effect that gambling has had on the sport, but at least it's not gone the other way. And at the end of the day, it is kept honest by the constant live practice and training of it. Like, so long as people are getting in the ring, and that's their primary, and in class they're sparring each other, and that's their primary means of practicing it, you're never going to lose the practical aspect of the sport. The danger is with things like, well, I'm going to say karate because karate is so broad that some will and some won't do this.
Yeah,
because it's such an old sport, and because a lot of people have moved away from live training in class. Those ones, when they become too focused on the pattern, they do get filled with mysticism rather than practicality. And if I had to choose between mysticism or people betting on fights, making it a bit more dilute, I'll take betting every time.
So I think that's the thing as well. So growing up, going to Muay Thai shows, kind of, you could tell if you was at a kickboxing show or a Muay Thai show because the Y crew had happened. But I think as it gets absorbed by other sports, so I think Muay Thai has done a really good job of keeping its history relevant and kind of showing that it exists. I think what's happened as it kind of gets more absorbed into things like MMA is it gets lost because you're training, as we've said before on here, kind of multiple different martial arts. You kind of don't have the time to do all of them in that intrinsic detail using it from MMA. I always used to like John Howard in the UFC because he'd come out with a moncon on. And it was always really nice to see that he trained enough and kind of absorbed the culture enough of training and like what it meant to want to wear the moncon when he walks out. And I think it's things like that I've kind of carried through that I really like about it. Like you said, it's honest. And I don't think I could be more eloquent than you, Alex. You get elbowed in the face, it's fucking brutal. And it's honest. But there is also that piece of history and the kind of tradition that follows the sport, which is fascinating, I think, and is worth learning.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think if there's also a thing to talk about, I mean, obviously this is something that is prominent in many martial arts, so this is not really a fucking surprise or something amazingly unique about Muay Thai, but respect is a big thing in Muay Thai as well. And Y Crew plays into that as well, because I think Y Crew also in a way pays respect to your opponents, right? As well as your gym. So it is, I think, in a lot of ways, it's a very respectful sport, and especially in Thailand, you don't see animosity really between fighters. It's all kind of business, and that's another part that I also really like, to be honest. Yeah,
that is a real difference to like Western like kickboxing and boxing and MMA. But to be honest, MMA's only inherited all that from boxing anyway. That's a real difference, is that people are a lot more chilled out with Muay Thai.
Yeah. And I think
I remember, so when I was 16-ish, or whenever I was kind of training Muay Thai, 16, 17, 18, upwards of there, I I used to dread if my friends were competing on MMA shows because I'd always go and there'd always be a fight and there'd always be some coked up idiot who'd walk around and like you'd have like your hoodie on from your gym and it'd like say like coach on the back and I'd always be there cornering and things like that. And like you'd get some coked up idiot while you're trying to get ice from the bar being like, I could fuck you up. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm 16 and my coach thought this would be a good experience for me to come. And he's like, yeah, I could fuck you up. Whereas if you went to like a Muay Thai show, they'd be like, oh, like people, obviously, you know, the gyms and they'd be like, oh, how's it going? I fought you 2 weeks ago at an interclub. How you doing? Is your leg still injured? And like, this is 12, 14 years ago. So like not the same now, but there was a clear difference in respect and people being nice to you. And it was like, we're here to have a fight, but you could be friends with the person from the other gym or you'd have respect. And it wasn't like this, like not being disrespectful, but it wasn't an amateur MMA show where you're trying to sell it to like Don King. Like sometimes it's just completely irrelevant. Like nobody's seen it anyway. It's not being broadcasted and you're acting like you're doing a promo. Whereas like Muay Thai, the respect really carried through.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the historical bits and we've got like the cultural bits like oh well, actually that's an interesting one. Why do they always have that music?
Ooh,
does anyone know what that's about?
Question.
Because that's a very Muay Thai thing to have that music.
Yeah.
So we always did it in the gym. We always used to spar with it, and it was the pace of the round. So they used to do it to speed you up. If you was having a slow round, or if you'd come out in the third round, third, fourth, and fifth rounds, the music really ramps up. So like you get the bounce, and it was always to speed you up.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't know. So this is me kind of talking out of my ass, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't something that it was brought when because the kings of Thailand really loved Thai boxing. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was something brought, through kings watching it and wanting some more, like bring it as an entertainment to have it. But I agree, absolutely. It's definitely a pacing thing, and the music always speeds up when the pace of the fight changes. If there's a live band, obviously.
But it is a core part of Muay Thai in as much as the White Crew is, and in as much as the headband that I don't know the name of is
Moncon.
The Moncon, that's the one. And then, but there's other interesting bits like the armbands they wear. But that's, I think I know that one. They were meant to be like pieces of cloth from your family's clothes that you'd tie on when you went to war or something, right?
That was my understanding of it. Yeah, it was like taking the.
Maybe I just heard it from you, and it's a lie then. But assuming that is true,
shit when I'm drunk, so it could be.
But I've always found it so fucking cool. Like, I always wanted to wear one.
But I always find that interesting. That it's because that is a real historical thing, like going off to war and wearing those bits on your arm. Like that really is touching on the history of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to go back as we sort of perhaps close this off. I want to go back to with the respect side of things. I think you also find that in the way that people spar. So real Thai sparring, if you go to a proper gym, it's very light sparring. It's tech sparring. So yes, you can go heavy on body shots and maybe low kicks, but you never try and take someone's head off. And I think that's and they they just don't train elbows. Like that's not, that's usually done on the pads. Like no one's going to fucking throw an elbow. But that's obvious. No one wants to get cut. But in any case, the sparring is I think that's unique in Thai boxing, where the sparring has always been light.
It's not always just the light side of it as well. So if you ever spar with like a really good Thai, in the most respectful way, they're dicks. Because it's so much fun for them, because they just take the piss out of you, but it's a game and it's really fun. So you'll kick them, they'll kick you back, and it's like, and it is very much that game. When you look at the kids who come up in it, it's not a case of you're going to fight and you're going to make loads of money and you're going to be the baddest man on the planet. They don't have that baddest man on the planet bullshit. It's like, this is a game, this is fun. Go and express yourself. And it really is. I remember having the absolute piss taken out of me, and like saw red rag to a bull, was like, stop sweeping me. It was just like, ugh. It just made it so much worse, because you're running in, you're rushing in, you're forever being caught. And it is a game, and it's, once you get better at it and you know the game, you can start being a dick to other people. And it's like, not a dick as a proper dick, but like, you can start doing things, and it is really fun. And when you get two people, you watch kind of Sanchez spar on his Instagram, or when he does his tours, and he does like a ring and he gets people in, and he's just having a ball with them, like taking the piss. If they do a cartwheel kick on him, he's doing one back on them, and it is just, it's fun. But it's that flow of when you fight, you're comfortable in there. If you're having 130 fights, you need to be comfortable in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to be clear, when I say light, I don't mean it's like a total fucking breeze and you don't get tired. Just it's
that touch. It's that I've got you. Hey, I've got you. Hey, I've got you. Rather than bang, you're dead.
Yeah, I think the real difference there is that it's not that people don't work hard. It's that you don't hurt the other person, and you don't have gym wars. You don't get a shooter box in Muay Thai.
Yeah, that doesn't happen, and I think that does happen in kickboxing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Dutch are pretty well renowned for.
Gosh, yeah, they go fucking hard.
but this is kind of what I think is the point, because, all right, even if the Dutch had, obviously there are a few differences with K1, which I believe is the primary style in the Netherlands. It's no extended clinches, no elbows, right? Mm-hmm. But I think maybe, unless we've got other points to go on, this would be a good point to start rounding out the podcast. Those aren't really the main differences about kickboxing, well, K1 and Muay Thai. Not really. I mean, obviously those are important, those rule aspects, but they're quite surface level, like what techniques you can do. Beyond that, a bit deeper, you've got like we said, the scoring aspects really get to the heart of what Muay Thai is about. You've got the balance and toughness, which is really how you score it, rather than damage and aggression, which is really how you win a K1 bout. And then beyond that sort of, I think even that seeps through to the social bits. You're chilled out at Muay Thai fights, and you're not trying to hurt people in the ring when you're training with them, because it's about balance and toughness, not about making a shit ton of money. Now, don't get me wrong, I know it's some people's living, but it's not about like making loads of money and being the baddest man on the planet. It's about the whole respect angle of it. And I kind of think that's, if we're going to talk about the philosophy of Muay Thai, it's all around those aspects.
It is. And I've seen fighters who have struggled. They've been looked at as like bad fighters because they express themselves in a different way. So I always remember up in Manchester, there was some fighters who were doing non-traditional styles, and people are always like, "Oh no, they're not very good." And it was like, because they're not conforming to like the traditional side of how you fight. And it is, they do like that tradition, and they like, this is how we fight, this is how we compete.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to the purity of the sport, which there's nothing wrong with it. So
yeah. And then there's obviously the social and the historical aspects, and I think once you've got those all in there, because you can't take away from the origins of it. Once you've got the style in training and the style in like the social aspects, the things that thinks are important in the sport, and then those historical things about the background of like where they went to war, the style of respect with the Y crew, and those different aspects, I think that's really the full picture you get of Muay Thai.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast and checking us out on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram under the name Combat Thoughts. We'll see you next time.